Okay, so describe going to the Japanese thing. Describe what it was like around when they dropped the atom bombs, before and after the atom bombs.
Well, before the atom bombs, of course, America, who was the biggest army that we had, would have had to have invaded Japan, and the loss of life would have been appalling on both sides. So President Truman gave him an ultimatum and said, if you don't surrender, we've got a weapon that is going to do you a lot of damage. And the Japanese assumed that he was bluffing, so they told America to get stuffed. So that was when Truman gave the order to drop the first bomb on Hiroshima. And they dropped the bomb, and then they waited for a reaction from the Japanese, and the Japanese emperor wanted to surrender, but the Japanese military, who were fanatics, refused to surrender. So America said if they weren't going to surrender, it was going to happen again. And sure enough, they went ahead and dropped an atom bomb on Nagasaki. Well, that did it for the Japanese. They decided to surrender straight away. And the ironical part about it was that years afterwards it came out that America had only got 2 atom bombs.
Right.
And they dropped them both, and they'd, you know, come to the end of the line.
So how much did you understand about what was going on at the time?
Oh, well, we had a very clear knowledge of what was going on, because the reporting on the radio was very detailed, and we knew exactly where the fighting was, and you know who was winning the fighting. We knew it right from the beginning, really.
Right.
It was a bit weird, because with it being a world war, we were getting knowledge of things that were going on the other side of the world, and sometimes there was a delay of 2 or 3 days before we got the real news, and a lot of it was blanketed by propaganda, you know, people telling us what we wanted to know. But everybody was fully aware what was going on against Japan. And when the war was over in Europe, when Germany surrendered, we started talking about sending troops to fight Japan. And I mean, everybody was thinking, this is bad news, you know, it could go on for years. And then out of the blue came the atom bomb.
Right.
I mean, people have criticised us for dropping the atom bomb, but because it killed so many people. But if there hadn't have been an atom bomb, the loss of life would have been 10 times greater.
Yeah.
Particularly in Japan. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we had the scene on the news of the Japanese surrendering on an American battleship to General MacArthur, and then the Americans occupied Japan, of course, and they stayed there for several years, and it finished up whereby they Americanised Japan.
Right.
And Japan started adopting American customs and all the rest of it. And this is when the Japanese aristocracy started having trouble with the children, because the children were fraternising with the Americans.
Right.
And it was totally against the Japanese philosophy, of course.
So was that a big party then? Was that? Did you know the war was? Because that was the actual end of the war.
Oh
wasn't
yes.
It?
Yeah, everybody went potty when it was over.
Yeah. So where were you then?
I was in the forces I was in the RAF at Market Drayton. We all went out for a rave up in Market Drayton. I got absolutely paralytic. I can remember God knows how many pints of beer I'd drunk. I can remember going in the toilet at the pub and being sick and bringing it all back, and then going back in the pub and carrying on drinking.
Right.
Like everybody else.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, discipline at the RAF station for about 24 hours broke down altogether.
Yeah. Were you aware that it was getting signed beforehand? Did you know that it was going to end? Or was it a complete surprise?
Oh, it was a complete surprise. I mean, the Japanese kept refusing to surrender, and we thought that they never would. The Germans, it was only a matter of time before they surrendered, because we'd occupied most of Germany. The Russians had occupied a lot of it as well, and the Germans knew the war was over. You was asking about the concentration camps.
Mm.
Well, the first we got to know about them was when an American unit came across a concentration camp, and they had no idea what it was. And when they got there, the guards were all spruced up in uniform, and they gave them like a big welcome, and they all wanted to shake hands, you know, and salute and all the rest of this bullshit. And when the Americans saw what it was like, and they were talking to one or two of the inmates, and they grasped what had been going on. The concentration camp was only just outside a town, and the Americans went into the town and forced the occupants to march out to the concentration camp. The German occupants of the town all, of course, said they didn't know it was there and they didn't know what was going on and all the rest of it. And then when they got them all out to the concentration camp, the Americans started shooting the concentration camp guards, one by one.
Right.
And that was only the first of the camps.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I know.
But as I say, we'd no idea what was going on. I think the German civilians must have known. I don't see how you could keep it quiet. But until the Germans started losing the war, they were 100% behind Hitler. They thought he was wonderful. And this is really the start of it all, you know. It was when he got put into power by the Germans, who thought he was wonderful.
So when was the first time you were aware of him?
Of Hitler?
Mm.
Oh, it was a long time before the war. I mean, he started coming into prominence about 1935, when he first of all annexed a part of France that used to belong to Germany, but was given to France after the end of the First World War. They went in and occupied that, and then he went in and occupied Czechoslovakia, which had quite a high population of German descent, and by this time we knew that we got problems, and we had a Prime Minister called Neville Chamberlain who was weak. He was a typical politician, and he went out and saw Hitler and negotiated a peace deal with him, and came back and said there would be no war in our time. And a lot of other people in the country didn't believe him, and we were hopelessly underarmed at that time, so we just started making aircraft and guns and weapons and bombs as fast as we could, and trying to build the army up because we knew it was coming. And then when Hitler invaded Poland, we gave him an ultimatum that if he didn't pull out of Poland within 24 hours, we were going to declare war on them. And sure enough, he didn't pull out of Poland, and we had no option but to declare war then.
And where were you when there was that radio? Because that was a radio broadcast, wasn't it? Do you remember where you were?
I was at home.
Right.
Yeah.
And you listened to that on the radio at home, did you?
Yeah.
Is that what everybody did?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, Neville Chamberlain, he lost all credibility after that. He was made to look an idiot. So he resigned, and that was when they made Churchill. First of all, they made him, put him in charge of the Admiralty, and then they made him Prime Minister. And the war was right up Churchill's street.
Right.
You know, he'd been involved before in a war in South Africa, the Boer War, and he made a bit of a name for himself in that. And when he told the Germans that we were going to fight and so on, we knew that it was getting serious then.
And did everyone believe in Churchill then? Was everyone backing Churchill?
Oh
at the
yes,
time? Yeah.
yes, he had a big following in the country. The biggest shock was when France collapsed.
Yeah.
I mean, we had an army of about 300,000 soldiers in France when France surrendered to the Germans, and we only just managed to get them out of France and back into England.
Yeah. So what about this Home Guard thing then?
Oh well, we had a Home Guard. I'm not sure whether they performed a useful function or what, because they were all old men, of course, and they weren't given proper weapons, and the theory was that the Home Guard were going to fight the Germans when they landed.
Right.
Well, I mean, they've been fighting them with picks and shovels. You know, it was daft. But it was a bit of a morale booster for the country.
And you were all on rations, right? So what was the food like during the war?
Well, funnily enough, although it was rationed, nobody starved. But, I mean, you got a very small amount of sugar each week and a very small amount of butter. One of the things that was never rationed was bread. Meat was rationed, and I can remember we didn't eat too badly. You know, I know it seems strange, but you see, very few people in my family ate sugar. Well, they all got a ration of sugar each, whether he took it or not. So there was plenty for the people that wanted sugar. And it was the same with butter. I mean, I never saw any meat. That was very rare. Occasionally you could get some sausages from the butchers, but they were rationed. But all in all, we didn't eat too badly. In fact, a lot of people have said since that the population ate more healthily during the war than they do now.
Yeah. So let's change subject. So describe your Isle of Man day out then.
The Isle of Man. Again, I mentioned this pal of mine called Ernest Taylor. I went with him. We went on the train to Liverpool, and then we caught the ferry from Liverpool to Douglas, and then we were staying at a small boarding house in Douglas. And I think we went for 2 weeks, and the first week it was practising, and they used to shut all the roads off, and they used to go out to practice about 6 o'clock in the morning and practice until about 9 o'clock, and then they used to throw the roads open again. And then the TT races, when they started, the roads were closed all day. And the starting point was just on the outskirts of Douglas. And there were various places around the course where you could go by coach to watch them. And I went to a well-known spotting place called Craignabar, which was on like a bend. And when you were on this bend, you could look up this long straight road, this hill, and you could see them coming down, and then they'd come round this corner, and off they went, and they were coming down at well over 100 miles an hour, and the roads were like Derbyshire roads, you know. I mean, you can imagine, I mean, the roads weren't as wide as Barholm Road. Right. They were really like country lanes.
Yeah, you ever see anybody come off?
Yes. I was stood at a place called Quarter Bridge, which was down the hill. It was only about a mile away from the start. And I went there, and they came down one at a time. And it was a very bad bend, very sharp bend. And a bloke came off on the bend. He'd only been in the race about 2 minutes, and that was him finished. Yeah.
What year was that then?
1950. And the whole of the Isle of Man, well, Douglas, everybody used to go and take the motorbike with them. The boat that we went on to Douglas, the deck, you couldn't shift for motorbikes.
Right.
And when they got off the boat at Douglas, they all drove away, and the entire seafront was covered in parked motorbikes. Incredible. And every model of motorbike you could think of. Because in those days, the big motorbike was the Norton 500cc.
Right.
Which it was only a 500cc single cylinder, and a bloke called Jeff Duke lapped the Isle of Man course on a Norton at 100 miles an hour. First time it had been done.
Right.
Yeah. But it was really exciting to watch them coming down. Particularly when occasionally they caught up with each other and they'd come down probably 2 or 3 at a time. You can imagine what it was like. 3 motorbikes doing 100 mile an hour, and they were only a few feet apart from each other, hurtling into this bend. I mean, it was amazing to me that there weren't more accidents than there were.
Mm.
It was notorious for people getting killed.
Right.
A lot of well-known TT riders got killed.
Did you have to qualify to get in?
I don't think so. You just had to pay to enter.
Right.
I think anybody could enter. And that's why there were so many accidents. The same blokes used to come in the top 3 year after year. You know, people like Jeff Duke and one or two more, I can't think of the names now. But they didn't make much money out of it, you know, Jeff. The prize money wasn't very much.
Mm.
I mean, they really did it because it was a hobby and they liked racing.
Mm. So when did you sell your bike? When did you get rid of your bike?
I bought it in 1950 and I sold it about 1955. But I didn't, once I got a company car, the motorbike was in the garage for about a year and never turned a wheel. And then somebody got to know because of people that I knew, lads that I knew, that I got this bike, and out of the blue one of them came up and asked if he could buy it. So I sold it just on the spur of the moment.
Right. Did you ever take a bike test?
A bike test?
A motorbike test? Did you
No.
have to take? You didn't have to take a driving test.
Oh,
for
I
a
had to
bike?
take a driving test.
For a car.
And for a motorbike.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was a same test, or was it a different test?
Different test.
Okay.
It was a different course.
Right.
And I took it about 2 years before I took my motorbike test.
Right.
Mind you, having ridden a motorbike, it made driving a car very much easier.
Yeah.
You know, you got a road safety sense. It was a good bike that age, yes. Never gave me any trouble.
You ever get into any scrapes? You ever come off it?
I only came off it once, going to Deep Car, and I didn't hurt myself, you know, and I didn't do much damage to the bike either.
What happened?
Well, I went round this corner and it got away from me, you know, slid away from me, and I came off it, the bike just slid away, and then I picked myself up and got on it.
Right.
I remember another time when I came off it. You know Walkley Lane, where you go down to Hillsborough Corner and you go past Walkley Library? Well, when you go down there, there's a very bad bend.
Mm.
And I was going to work one morning and it was snowing like the clappers. And icy. And I came off on that bend. I just slid sideways, but I didn't hurt myself. I didn't do any damage to the bike. I just picked it up and carried on to work.
Right. So talk to me about you lived through all the currency change and everything, the money change.
Oh,
right?
yes. Yeah. I couldn't get used to that, Jeff. It took me years to get used to decimal money. because I couldn't grasp it. And the change was overnight, of course, from pounds, shillings and pence to the new pence, you know. But now, of course, going back to pounds, shillings and pence would have been ridiculous, because it was so complicated that foreign people coming into the country couldn't understand it.
So how was it? I mean, what was, how many pence was there?
Oh well, there was the halfpenny. In fact, in those days we used to have a farthing that was a quarter of a penny, and then there was a halfpenny, half a penny, and then a penny, and then a sixpence, which was 6 pence, and then a shilling, which was 12 pence, and then what was the name of the coin for 20 pence?
Was it a crown? It wasn't a crown.
Yeah, I can't remember, Jeff. Anyway, when it changed over, of course, there were 240 pence in the pound originally. Well, with the new decimal currency, there were 100 new pennies to the pound. So that one new penny was worth 2.4 old pennies.
Right.
So, and the currency then became 5p, 10p, 20p.
Yeah.
And we used to have a 50 pence note, banknote in those days. And then we had a pound note and a £5 note. And then the next was a £20 note. But it took me quite a long time to get used to decimal money. I couldn't think in terms of decimal money. I could only think in terms of sixpences and shillings.
Right.
And of course everybody is now trying to get us onto the metric system of measurement. And I can't handle that at all, you know. People talk about centimetres and metres, and I have to think and work out that a centimetre is 2.5 inches.
Right.
So that 4 centimetres is 10 inches. I can only think in terms of inches and feet and yards and miles, whereas all the younger generation now talk in terms of metres and